I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime. Okay, so I think we were going to talk about a movie we just watched, The Woman in Cabin 10. What did you think of that?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned last time that this was really the only Ruth Ware book we didn't like. So to be fair, I didn't go into it with super high expectations. Love Ruth Ware, love Keira Knightley, didn't love the movie. And I will say, though, as you mentioned when we were watching it, at least it was a lot shorter than the book.
It's true, and it's true. I had to refresh my memory because we've read all of her books, and I had forgotten some of them. And I'm like, we liked every single one, but this one. So why is it this one? Not that we're this deciding factor, obviously, but why does this one get a sequel? Why does this one get a movie? I mean, I feel like so many, really any of her other books deserve the same treatment.
Yeah, I would have loved to see like the It Girl in a movie or like a sequel to In a Dark Dark Wood.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like any of the other ones would have been fine. And yeah, I did think because I remember it's been a while since we read the book, but that I was just kind of dragged on. So, I mean, I did appreciate that in the movie, like you said, that it was shorter and there were good actors. I always like Keira Knightley, really, whatever she does. And then I think I'm the one that always says that the British acting community is small. So I love seeing people that, maybe aren't obviously as well known as Kira, but like David Morrissey, I think he was in Sherwood and we really liked that. And then how do you pronounce is it Daniel Ings? Is that how you think you say it?
I don't know. I think that's how it's spelled.
Anyways, I mean, and we saw him way back when in Lovesick, which we both thought was really cute. And then he's been in, what was the Agatha Christie one we just watched?
Why didn't they ask Evans?
Yeah, that was good too. Anyways, I always like, even if I don't love the characters, which I did not like either of their characters in the movie, I just really like when I see them in things. So
Yeah, we really get a kick out of the British acting community being small so that we see some of the same actors frequently.
yeah, and if they're not super well known, I'm one of those weird people that I have seen that person. They might have been in one scene in, some random TV show from 8 years ago. I must look it up. I must figure it out. So I like when I actually recognize them.
I mean, I think more people are like that than you think because you have that curiosity. You want to know.
Yeah, yeah. It's true, I suppose.
But it was only an hour and a half. If you hadn't read the book, you'd like it more. I don't know.
I mean, that might be true. And I didn't remember all aspects of the book, but, and I mean, I guess you could say that about a lot of things, but it was just really kind of far fetched. It was just kind of, I mean, I'm not going to give it away for, somebody that hasn't seen it, but I thought, what really happens to somebody, plot line was kind of lame, honestly.
Yeah, I was trying to think about it, like comparing it to Ruth Ware's other books, why I didn't like it as much and why I thought it was more far-fetched. And I really feel like for me, it came down to even if some of the plot lines in some of her other books are, I don't know, objectively a little out there, there's enough backstory that I can see it. I think the problem with the book and the movie, there wasn't enough backstory for me.
Yeah, that's true. I was just thinking about Zero Days, and I can't remember the lead female character, her name. But I will say that there's some parts of that are super drawn out, but, like, right from the beginning, I like her. You know what I mean? Like, I like her. There's a bit of backstory about what happens to her husband, and I liked her, and I was rooting for her, and it's not that I wasn't rooting for Lo in this, but it was just yeah, it's just kinda they're all you get a couple minutes, and then they're all thrown on this yacht, and there's no yeah, like you said, no backstory. You're not really it's not that again, we don't want anything bad to happen to the, good characters, but you're not really rooting for them. And that sounds snotty.
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I
Mm,
felt the same way.
yeah. But Kira love Kira.
Yes, and happy to see the other actors that to support them, all that.
Yeah, true.
Alrighty then, anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's get into it then. We're back with part two on Amelia Dyer in our theme on female killer nurses. Last week, we uncovered the barbaric business of baby farming, where without financial assistance from the father, Single mothers in Victorian England paid for their illegitimate babies to be fostered or adopted. Nurse Amelia Dyer had gone through two husbands, one sentence of hard labor for gross negligence, multiple stays at asylums, and various career changes before returning to baby farming in 1895 to ensure that her single stint in the workhouse wouldn't turn into a repeat occurrence. The police investigation into Amelia's connection to the abandonment of a young boy at a train station had gone nowhere. Still, Amelia decided it was time for another relocation. She, her daughter Polly, son in law Arthur Palmer, and accomplice Jane Smith all moved from Cardiff, Wales to the Reading suburb of Caversham in England. Once at 26 Piggott's Road, Amelia began using her name from her first marriage, Mrs. Thomas. Mrs. Thomas appeared to her neighbors to be a law abiding elderly woman. Every day, she could be seen carrying her carpet bag to the train station across the Clappers Bridge.
On these frequent trips, Amelia traveled to adopt children for a one time fee. She had started taking in both unwanted babies and older children and had stopped fostering, although she would occasionally accept weekly payments, but only when strictly necessary, since she then had to keep those children alive. Presumably, it was more difficult to drug or starve an older child to death over a period of time, lest they figure out what was being done to them. Besides, she had graduated to a new method of murder by this point, strangulation. After getting the children in her clutches, she'd knot a twice wrapped length of white edging tape around their small necks, having watched and waited for them to draw their last gasping breath. Amelia left the tape used by dressmakers for stability as her calling card. Cheaper than medicating them, I guess?
And a lot faster now that she no longer made a habit of keeping them alive for a weekly fee.
Quicker death equals more kids and more money.
Too true.
No longer taking the risk of having doctors certify the children's deaths, one stint in prison was all it took for her to learn that lesson. Amelia took body disposal into her own grubby hands by hiding them in the home or garden of whichever property she was renting at the time, or by encasing the remains in paper packages and relying on the river to keep her secrets. It's just so horrific, and no way everyone in that house didn't know what was going on.
You would imagine that the large scale murder of children would be difficult to hide from the people who live with you.
I mean, you would think, and especially in such tight living quarters.
Yeah, it's not like she had a separate wing of the manor to store the babies in.
Good point.
While the river would later give up one of these temporary graves, Amelia had had years to indulge her murderous impulses in pursuit of profit. Although the exact numbers aren't known, Amelia may have been killing children for up to 3 decades, the entirety of her career as a baby farmer.
Oh my God.
I know. If she killed 10 babies a year, which is surely an underestimate given the fact that she procured 20 children in the 2 months before her arrest, she could have killed more than 300 babies. As for how she got away with it for as long as she did, Amelia's practice of changing her name and address meant the mothers who had trusted her often couldn't find her to track down what had happened to their children. It also didn't hurt that her bouts of insanity always seemed to coincide with a surge in police interest.
I mean, she wasn't dumb.
You can say a lot about Amelia, but not that. On top of all that, the infant mortality rate wasn't exactly low in Victorian England. Out of every 1,000 live births, 149 of those babies died. For anyone else whose least favorite class was math, that's almost 15%. So, Amelia had her pick of excuses when someone was trying to trace a child. She could say that they had died of natural causes or had been relocated. She could even pretend that they had been taken back into their mother's care. Despite all of these factors working in her favor, Amelia knew that the only way to stay out of prison was to stay on the move.
After Amelia, Polly, Arthur, and Jane started another short term stay, this time for 2 months at Six Elm Villas in October 1895, the foursome added another to their makeshift family when childless couple Polly and Arthur placed an advertisement and adopted a little boy named Harold for £12. As for Amelia's many adoptions, having procured a minimum of 15 infants during the 9 months she called Caversham home, Amelia began renting a terraced house at 45 Kensington Road in Reading. Polly, Arthur, and Harold remained for a time before moving to a ground floor room paid for by Amelia in the house of carriage cleaner Albert Cullum and his wife Charlotte in London at 76 Mayo Road, Willesden, in mid January 1896. Jane, on the other hand, would remain Amelia's roommate until her arrest. Because although Amelia may have thought she could avoid detention with her frequent address and name changes, the bodies of the children she strangled wouldn't stay hidden forever, and the truth about how they met their end would lead to Amelia's.
One woman who would prove pivotal in bringing about Amelia's comeuppance was 25-year-old Evelina Marmon, a single Christian woman who had moved from the countryside to Cheltenham to earn a living as a barmaid at the Plough Hotel. Like many before and after her, she slept with an anonymous man, got pregnant, then gave birth to a little girl in November 1895. Unable to bring up her daughter by herself in their home at 23 Manchester Street, she presented herself as a married woman by using the name of Mrs. Scott in an advertisement in the Bristol Times and Mirror in March 1896. Beside the advertisement in which she sought a woman to adopt her child was one taken out by someone styling herself as Mrs. Harding, writing as one half of a married childless couple hoping to adopt for £10. This Mrs. Harding wrote to Evelina that she would be happy to raise her baby girl as her own in their country home. She conveyed her and her husband's fondness for children, as well as their affiliation with the Church of England. Saying she wanted to take the baby as soon as possible, she even offered to have Evelina and her friends over to visit her daughter once she was in her care. The two continued corresponding throughout the end of March, and when Evelina shared that her daughter's name was Doris, Amelia made a point of saying what a pretty name it was for what she was sure was a pretty child, which is giving me major Wicked Witch vibes.
Definitely. Also, the fake charm and kindness she turns on for those unsuspecting, desperate mothers, it's just so vile.
Because of course they believe it. It's not like Amelia was wearing her pointed hat when she went to visit them.
That's good. And if only she had been.
Mhm.
After an agreement was supposedly suggested by Miss Harding's husband on March 31st, 1896, Amelia, aka Anne Harding, arrived at Evelina's home in Cheltenham at 12:30 in the afternoon, where she signed the adoption agreement Evelina had drawn up with Evelina's landlady as their witness. Evelina then handed over the £10, and Miss Harding signed the receipt on the back of the agreement. Evelina traveled with Miss Harding and Doris to Gloucester on the 5:20 train from Cheltenham, then sent them off with a cardboard box filled with baby clothes. When Evelina last saw Doris, her healthy little girl was wearing a white bonnet and a fawn colored pelisse, which is a kind of fur cloak. Having retrieved her carpet bag from the train station cloakroom in Cheltenham, Miss Harding said she'd write to Evelina once the pair got to Reading that evening. Poor Evelina, she had probably dressed her daughter in her finest clothes, handing her off for what she believes is a better life. I mean, it's really heartbreaking.
I'm sure she dressed Doris in the most expensive thing she could afford. She truly thought she was giving her daughter her best chance in life.
Yeah, I'm sure. Miss Harding did, in fact, send Evelina a letter on April 2nd saying her daughter was doing well. She also mentioned that her own sister was gravely ill, so she had to go and see her, but would find time to write again soon. When Evelina didn't hear from her, she wrote to Mrs. Harding 2 days later asking her to kiss Doris for her and to write back about how the little girl's left arm was doing after the 4 vaccinations she had received before leaving Cheltenham. Instead of the requested update from the woman to whom she had entrusted her child, on April 7th, a week since she had last seen Doris, a constable came to talk to Evelina about Mrs. Harding.
But prior to learning who Mrs. Harding really was, Evelina had no reason to question her. Based on her interactions with the seemingly sensible and affectionate woman, Evelina didn't even feel the need to ask for references. When Mrs. Harding had said she was going to visit her sister in law in the Gloucester County Asylum, Evelina was completely unaware that she had actually been the one to stay in the asylum to escape punishment for her crimes, and had now taken Doris to commit yet another unspeakable murder. Having obtained one victim, Amelia was already well on her way to getting another, when around 10:30 in the evening of March 31st, the day she picked up Doris, she showed up at her daughter and son-in-law's accommodations at 76 Mayo Road with the baby girl in her arms. Speaking of Polly, we do have to mention that much of what happens next was retold by her, and as we'll go on to see, she's hardly a reliable narrator. But with that caveat inserted, let's get into the sinister sequence of events. When Polly opened the door to her mother, Amelia wouldn't initially come in. She said that she was waiting for someone. In response to Polly's question about the shawl covered baby she was carrying, Amelia confirmed that it was Evelina Marmon's daughter. As for her plans for the child, Amelia said that she was giving the brown haired and blue eyed little girl to a Mrs. Harris from Pickett's Road. When Doris soon disappeared, Amelia explained it away by saying that she was already settling in with Mrs. Harris.
Despite her earlier reluctance to enter the home, Amelia had apparently decided to stay the night at her daughter's because when Polly came back into the house after about 10 minutes in the backyard, she found that her mother had come inside and had seated herself at the table in the sitting room. The carpet bag had been pushed under the couch, and the cardboard box was open. The generous Amelia offered her daughter the box and some of the clothes inside, including the fawn colored pelisse, which Amelia said she had made for Harold, the young boy Polly had adopted. Uh, we're supposed to believe that Polly didn't question any of this,
What, you mean it doesn't seem like Amelia's the type to make clothes for children when she isn't busy murdering them?
right? And I think Polly knew that.
Polly definitely knows more than she's letting on.
At around noon the next day, Amelia, Polly, and the nearly 2-year-old and rather ill looking Harold met a couple named Alfred and Amelia Sargent at Paddington Station. Amelia Sargent had previously written to a woman calling herself Mrs. Harding after seeing an adoption advertisement in the Weekly Dispatch. Having asked for an interview around 2 in the afternoon on March 25th, 1896, Amelia Sargent visited Mrs. Harding at the residence in which she claimed to have raised her niece and a boy who was currently serving on a ship, i.e., 2 children who had survived into adulthood.
In the privacy of her own home, Mrs. Harding confessed that her name was actually Annie Thomas. She was using an alias because her proud husband, who worked as a goods guard on the Great Eastern Railway, had told her not to take out the advertisement under her real name. Satisfied with her kindly manner and comfortable looking home, Sargent didn't ask for any references and agreed to pay Mrs. Thomas £10 to adopt a 13-month-old boy named Harry Simmons.
She is good at weaving a believable backstory.
As all con artists have to be. Harry was the only child of Lizzie Simmons, who said her husband of around a year had died just before Harry's birth in early 1895. And whether this was true or Lizzie made this claim to save her and her child's reputation, we're not going to judge her either way.
Absolutely not. Women had zero options.
You can say that again. Shortly after having her son, Lizzie had been about to relocate to Gloucester for a lady's maid's position and had plans to move abroad. So she left 1-month-old Harry with her childhood friend, Amelia Sargent. Amelia agreed to take Harry into the home she shared with her undertaker husband and 6 children in South Ealing. But As you'd imagine, caring for 7 children was a struggle. So Amelia sent Harry to live in Brentford with a local carer named Mrs. Sharp. In the year that Harry stayed with Mrs. Sharp, far from forgetting about him, Amelia came to see the young boy every other week.
After her old friend Lizzie failed to send the 6 shillings a week she had promised, and indeed never reached out again, Amelia footed Mrs. Sharp's weekly fee to keep the toddler out of the workhouse. When she was no longer able to afford Harry's care, Amelia attempted to honor Lizzie's wish to see her son adopted by someone who would raise him as their own. Unfortunately, this Mrs. Thomas turned out to be none other than baby farmer Amelia Dyer. Amelia Sargent had been prepared to take Harry to Reading herself, but Mrs. Thomas wrote of her upcoming trip to London and offered to meet her at Paddington Station. So Alfred and Amelia came with Harry on April 1st. They met Mrs. Thomas on the down platform, and she introduced Polly as her niece. Polly didn't even blink at the lie. It was a well used one that Amelia had been offering up since Polly had first married Arthur. The group of 4 adults and 2 children went to the refreshment room where Amelia Sargent handed off Harry Simmons a paper parcel of clothing tied with a string, £5, and an IOU for the other £5 to be paid to Mrs. Thomas on April 11th. In return, Mrs. Thomas handed back a receipt fashioned from one of Alfred's billheads with her signature and extended an invitation for a visit, fully intending for Amelia Sargent never to see her or Harry again.
Having conned the sergeants, Amelia, along with Polly, Harold, and Harry Simmons, returned to the house on Mayo Road around 2 p.m. When Harry Simmons became upset, Amelia shook him before giving him a pacifier. After a brief period of quiet, he began to cry again. Since it worked so well the first time, Amelia shook him once more. Then Polly gave some bread, butter, and milk to the little boy Amelia was already calling a little devil.
Good God.
It doesn't exactly bode well. At around 6:15, Amelia asked if Polly was putting Harold to bed. When she said that she was, Amelia announced that she would put Harry to bed too. Polly returned from her bedroom to the sitting room around 15 minutes later to find the little boy lying on the couch, covered completely with a shawl. Polly moved closer to get a better look at him, but Amelia shoved her away, snarling that she couldn't touch him or she would risk waking him up. To Polly, this wasn't particularly odd because her sometimes violent mother had been physical with her in the past when she didn't want her to do something. Polly knew better than to go against her wishes. When Arthur came into the sitting room and approached the couch, Amelia ordered him not to touch the sleeping child either.
Sleeping with a shawl covering his face?
To block out the light, I guess?
Okay, totally plausible.
I believe it.
Before Arthur, Polly, and Amelia headed out around 7 that evening, Amelia asked if they could lock up her carpet bag. Polly asked why that was necessary. Amelia didn't list any valuable contents, but said that she didn't want others messing with her things. With this suspicious statement hanging in the air and the unmoving covered boy asleep on the couch, her carpet bag was stowed beneath it and the sitting room door was locked. When the 3 came back to the house after nearly an hour and a half, the little boy remained silent and still on the slippery horsehair couch. That's gross. And Polly and Arthur were fine leaving Harold alone along with the sleeping child on the couch?
The landlady might have been around, but if not, it's not like any of them were earning Parent of the Year awards.
I mean, that's for sure. Amelia went over to Harry, looked at him without removing the shawl, and reiterated that the apparently frozen little boy was asleep and not to be disturbed. An hour or so before midnight, Polly and Arthur were about to head to bed when Polly offered to get a bottle ready for Harry. Amelia refused, saying she could get it herself if he woke up. Having declined landlady Charlotte Cullum's offer to sleep with her, Amelia planned to sleep on the couch beside the little boy and would know right away if he needed something.
But when Polly came back into the sitting room around 8 the next morning, only Amelia was sitting on the end of the couch. She wouldn't say where the little boy was. But as Polly was sweeping the room, she saw a parcel beneath the couch. Only able to see one end of it, she could tell that it looked like a napkin was tied around something shaped like a baby's head. Upon seeing the rest of it, she couldn't help but notice that it resembled a baby's body. When she again asked her mother what had happened to Harry, Amelia told her not to worry about it. Amelia continued to make zero effort to alleviate her daughter's suspicions throughout the rest of the day. She later turned to Polly from her place in the sitting room and asked if she had any bricks. After Polly said she didn't, Amelia asked if Arthur could get her one. Polly again said no and added that her husband would only fulfill her mother's strange request if he knew what she was going to do with it. In spite of Polly's refusal, Amelia soon got what she wanted anyway, because when Polly went into the backyard, Amelia followed and noticed some loose bricks laying on the ground. The landlord, Albert Cullum, happened to have had a fireplace grate moved in his kitchen. Once it was relocated, Albert had stored the leftover loose bricks underneath the rabbit hutch in his back garden. Seeing them, Amelia picked one up, took it into the sitting room, and placed it beneath the couch beside the carpet bag and the baby-shaped parcel.
At around 7:20 that evening, Amelia asked her daughter and son-in-law to come with her to Paddington Station. Having gotten herself ready in her bedroom, Polly entered the sitting room to find that the carpet bag was stuffed so full that the top wouldn't close. The bulging contents had simply been covered with brown paper and held together with a string. The parcel and brick were nowhere to be seen. When Polly, Arthur, and the bag carrying Amelia left the house, Polly asked her mother what the neighbors would think of her coming with a child but leaving without one. Amelia replied offhandedly that Polly could tell them whatever she liked. As she saw Amelia off on the 9:15 train from Paddington Station to Reading, Polly watched her mother exit the first carriage after someone else climbed in, then go into another empty carriage with her overflowing carpet bag. Polly's feeling of unease only grew upon her return home when she noticed that a skein of tape was missing from her work basket in the sitting room.
Amelia, meanwhile, returned from another day at the office to the home she shared with Jane at around 11:30 in the evening on April 2nd. When Amelia came in, Jane asked why she was back so late and why she no longer had the carpet bag with her. Instead of admitting that she had been disposing of that harbinger of doom, Amelia claimed that she was late because she had to take a special train due to the crowds traveling in the lead up to Easter, and that she had given the bag to Polly before she made her way to Bridgewater, the town Amelia had been eyeing for her next move. Outwardly, Jane went along with Amelia's version of events. Unbeknownst to Amelia, though, a few months earlier, in January 1896, Jane had gone to the Reading branch of what had been founded by Reverend Benjamin Waugh in 1884 as the London Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, but which began operating nationally 5 years later as the NSPCC. In response to Jane's report, a local NSPCC officer visited Amelia's home at 45 Kensington Road and noticed a visibly underfed 6-month-old. He warned Amelia that he would soon be back. For her part, Jane pleaded ignorance of what had compelled him to check out the home and prayed that the threat of prosecution would be enough for Amelia to change her ways.
Yeah, right.
Exactly, because unsurprisingly, it wasn't. Nonetheless, Amelia's day of reckoning was drawing near.
On March 30th, 1896, a bargeman was pushing his craft down the River Thames at the Clapper's Weir beside Caversham Lock. That is a mouthful. When he pulled his pole up through the reedy water, he found a brown paper package stuck to its end. Upon unwrapping the layers of newspaper, linen, and brown paper, he exposed the partially decomposed remains of a baby girl. This baby girl had clearly been strangled with the white edging tape that had been knotted below her left ear, and the package in which she had been dumped had sunk to the bottom of the river due to the brick placed inside of it. It was later learned that the baby's name was Helena Fry, and her mother, an unwed servant named Mary Fry, had been seduced by a rich local merchant and had given her illegitimate daughter to Amelia Dyer. In the wake of this discovery, George Choosley, the Reading Borough Police Chief Constable, put his detectives on the case. Eager to catch the killer, Detective Constable James Anderson performed a microscopic analysis of the wrapping paper. Because the package had only been submerged for a few days, he was able to identify the Midland Railway stamp from October 24th, 1895. That was marked Bristol Temple Meads. He could also decipher the smudged writing that spelled out the name and address of a Mrs. Thomas of 26 Pickett's Road, Caversham, Amelia Dyer's former married name and address, which police only found after showing up at the property to learn that Amelia had moved.
Once Detective Constable Anderson and Sergeant Harry James ascertained from the neighbors that Amelia now called a rented two up, two down on Kensington Road home, they ordered surveillance on Amelia's new place of residence and learned that she would likely make a run for it if anything seemed amiss. So, an operation was planned in which a young woman would go undercover and make an appointment about having her baby adopted. Oblivious to her impending imprisonment, Amelia agreed to the single mother coming to her home 2 days later with £50 and her baby. Surely the promise of such a substantial fee was enough of an incentive for Amelia to ignore any misgivings she may have had. But after she organized the transaction to take place at night, the police knew that they had enough to bring in this baby farmer. And on April 4th, 1896, 5 days after Helena Fry's remains were found, Amelia opened her front door to Sergeant James and Detective Constable Anderson, who arrested her for having feloniously killed a child. Arthur and Polly were also arrested on suspicion of being accessories to murder.
Even though she was only arrested for one wrongful death, the statements from the mothers, as well as those from the witnesses who had watched up to 6 babies a day go into Amelia's home on Pickett's and Kensington Road, pointed to the murders of dozens more infants. If investigators weren't convinced by the eyewitnesses, they certainly were by the letters, vaccination papers, receipts from the advertisements she had placed in newspapers all over the country, pawn tickets for clothing belonging to the children Amelia had killed, white edging tape, and heaps of baby clothes. When Detective Constable Anderson went to the Cullums home at 76 Mayo Road on April 6th, he discovered even more evidence in the form of 10 more pawn tickets for yet more tiny garments. Advertisements for her services in Newcastle upon Tyne, Bristol, Gloucestershire, and London under numerous names such as Anne Harding, Annie Dye, and Mrs. Smith, Stanfield Thomas, and Watham made it clear that her crimes had spread far wider than anyone had realized. Amelia had been more than willing to leave her homes in Reading and Bristol to travel for hours to places as far afield as Plymouth and Liverpool to collect a fee of around £10, which adds up to nearly £1,000 today.
With this mountain of evidence as the wind in their sails, the rivers Thames and Kennet were dredged right away, much to the fascination of the press and the many onlookers watching from the banks. Throughout the month of April, investigators pulled out 6 more infant bodies with white edging tape tied around their necks. When Detective Constable Anderson took one of these gruesome packages, retrieved near Clapper's Pond, the mortuary, the remains were identified as belonging to a baby girl of around 12 months. Disturbingly, the corpse was so decomposed that the body and head fell apart when the package was opened.
It's also gruesome.
Yeah, this case doesn't conjure up the best mental images, not that any of them do, to be fair.
I mean, that is true.
One after another, body after body was recovered. After the body of a baby boy who was only a few weeks old was discovered on April 8th, 2 more corpses were dredged up the next day. It was around 4:40 on that Friday afternoon when Alfred George Botting and a fellow boatman snagged something from 12 feet below the Clappers Bridge. These two men, who were among those dragging the River Thames for more remains, had pulled up what seemed to be some kind of carpet bag.
The supervisor of the search, Sergeant James, was called to examine the object. Just as it had been when Polly had last seen it, the carpet bag was so full that it wouldn't close. The brown paper covering the contents was visible through the nearly 3-inch gap at the top. After the string around the bag was removed, Sergeant James took off the paper and the remains of a little girl appeared. Underneath her was another body, one belonging to a little boy. A laborer named Henry Smithwaite was tasked with bringing the bag to the police station where the bodies could be photographed before they were delivered to the mortuary. Once the bag was taken in, its contents were examined more fully. Authorities quickly established that a brick had been laid on top of two small bodies, and nearly 3/4 of another brick had been placed at the bottom of the bag to weigh down the corpses.
The police had previously informed Evelina Marmon that Amelia wasn't suitable to care for her 4-month-old daughter, leading her to believe that she would soon be reunited with Doris. Instead, on April 11th, she was brought to look at her corpse on a slab in the Reading mortuary. The cardboard box she had sent with Doris still had a few clothes inside, and one of the 12 diapers she had filled it with was all that covered the little girl's body. Lying beside the 1 foot 10-inch long body of Doris was the young boy she had been stacked on top of. Her plans of writing Mrs. Thomas forgotten, Amelia Sargent was also taken to the Reading mortuary on April 11th, where she identified the toothless, brown haired, blue eyed little boy wearing a flannel shirt as Harry Simmons. The autopsies were performed at the Reading mortuary that morning. Inside Doris's stomach was some milky fluid, and around her neck was a double mark made by the tightly tied white tape. Considering this clear indentation, it was ruled that she had died nearly 10 days ago from strangulation. Harry, whose 28-inch long body was slightly less decomposed, had also died around 10 days earlier from strangulation. Harry's lungs were filled with blood and air. His stomach contained partially digested food that appeared to be ground rice, and his neck was twice wrapped with a tape that had been tied in a bow. The length of the tape used to murder the children was nearly 40 inches and would have allowed Amelia to instantly subdue both children almost immediately after she had gotten her hands on them.
Just as Amelia Sargent later identified the seemingly never worn clothes seized by the police as though she had given to Dyer, Evelina confirmed that the children's clothing, including the fond pelisse Polly had given Sergeant James, were Doris's. Amelia Sargent's requests to speak with Dyer were refused, but she was able to see her again when she and Evelina Marmon were taken to the police station yard. Once there, the pair were asked to scan the lineup of 4 women brought before them, and they confirmed that Amelia was the woman to whom they had given the children. Even more damning, a 9-year-old boy named Willie Thornton backed up Jane Smith's identification of the carpet bag as the one he had brought his clothes in when he moved into Amelia's home in Reading. His miraculous survival after 6 months with Amelia was due to the weekly fees she charged for his care. But in leaving him alive, she had left another witness to condemn her. Having confirmed its pattern and torn insides, Willie explained that the carpet bag had been kept in an upstairs bedroom cupboard, but that it went missing after Amelia's eventful stay with Polly in London. For her part, Amelia claimed to have taken it with her to carry some clothes and ham for a child she was procuring. To make matters even worse for Amelia, after Polly and Arthur's landlord, Albert Cullum, was shown some of the bricks the police had found with the babies' bodies, he confirmed that they looked remarkably similar to the ones he had under the rabbit hutch from the fireplace grate removal, which were clearly recognizable by the burns they had sustained from the fire.
While the evidence against Amelia may have been overwhelming, at the inquest held in Reading at the beginning of May, nothing was found that suggested that Amelia's daughter Polly or her son in law Arthur had helped her carry out the killings. Further pointing to their innocence was the confession Amelia wrote on April 16th, 1896, during the 4 weeks she was held at HM Prison Reading, awaiting trial, in which she admitted that she was the only person responsible for the murders.
Well, bowl me over. I'm honestly shocked that she didn't drag them down with her.
It's true, but there wasn't a financial incentive for implicating them, so she must not have seen the point.
I'm still surprised.
I hear that. Having saved her relatives, she asked the prison matron, Ellen Gibbs, to send her confession to the police. Ellen had witnessed Amelia talking to herself, as most prisoners do, and seen her distress over Arthur's imprisonment for being an accessory after the fact. When Ellen read the letter and commented on Amelia having pleaded guilty to everything of which she was accused, Amelia responded, "I wish to. They can't charge me with anything worse than I have done." So Ellen sent the letter to the governor and reported Amelia's depression, which the magistrates chose to ignore. Amelia wrote a second letter the same day that she penned her confession, telling Arthur that she had told the truth and taking full responsibility for her crimes and advising him to hire a lawyer, but not to bother getting one for her. Following the rules of the prison, Ellen sent this letter to the governor as well, and Arthur was released.
Although Amelia had confessed and instructed the now freed Arthur and Polly not to waste money on a lawyer, when her trial began on May 20th, 1896, at the Old Bailey, she went for an insanity defense to avoid the death penalty for the charge of the willful murder of Doris Marmon. If you're also wondering why no other charges were brought, this was apparently due to a lack of evidence that she had killed any of the other children. And that's a shame.
It is. I will say, though, that some sources say that she was tried for both Doris's and Harry Simmons murders, which makes sense since they were found together. But maybe if one murder was enough to argue for the death penalty, the prosecution didn't see the point of complicating their case by bringing the others into it.
I mean, I could see that. Speaking in her defense was Dr. Forbes Winslow, a psychiatrist whose theories about the 1888 Jack the Ripper murders had made some suspect that he was the true culprit. With his own cloud of suspicion hanging over him, Dr. Forbes Winslow examined Amelia twice at Holloway Prison during the month of the trial and determined her to be insane and not responsible for her crimes because of her hallucinations and delusions. Even though Amelia was the one to bring up her past depressive episodes and auditory hallucinations that resulted in her making attempts on her own life, he did not think she was putting on an act.
Dr. Winslow believed her when she spoke of becoming suicidal after being locked in a padded room at the Gloucester County Asylum. He testified that her ability to remember events that had happened years ago versus her inability to remember her crimes or even the names of Doris and Harry was because of her age of 57.
I mean, she was at an advanced age for that time period.
Since she had made it past the average life expectancy, I guess so. And because of her depression, or as it was referred to at the time, melancholia. He recalled that during one of their meetings, he had mentioned the letter her son had sent, and Amelia had been confused that her son was alive, given that she had been visited by his and her mother's spirits the night before. These apparitions would often instruct Amelia to join them in death. When she was pressed about these visions, at first Amelia declined to provide the dreadful details, but then admitted that she had seen herself unearthing her mother's bones. She also confessed that she had slept for 3 weeks after her son enlisted. When she finally came to, it was to the feeling of rats and worms eating her flesh. One juror who heard this account said she would soon be proven prophetic once she was sentenced to death.
In addition to reading and writing to Jane to send her things, Amelia had kept busy in custody by singing hymns and delivering sermons to the other inmates, which I'm sure they loved.
I'm
Wa-
sure.
Once her trial began, Amelia held a hymn book every time she appeared in court. Her defense used her display of religiosity, remorse, since she wrote about her dreams of being forgiven in her confession and letters, and mental distress, which was evidenced by her rocking back and forth with her eyes downcast throughout the trial, to argue that she wasn't fully responsible for her crimes, or she's just a really good actress.
Or that.
On the other side of the courtroom, the prosecution made that very argument, maintaining that Amelia was simply pretending, just as she had previously feigned insanity to wait out the investigations from the relative safety of the asylum. Dr. James Scott, the medical officer at Holloway, had spoken with the prisoner daily and saw nothing to indicate insanity. Lecturer and author Dr. George Savage agreed with Dr. Scott's assessment. When he examined Amelia and asked her about the murders, she told him that if she committed them, she must have been mad at the time. She loved children, so what other explanation could there be? I mean, I almost choked on my water.
I mean, it's too much for anyone to swallow.
It is. However, in speaking of the voices she heard, Amelia reported that they only ever told her to kill herself, leaving Dr. Savage to conclude that she was not suffering from homicidal mania, which would manifest in the voices telling her to kill others.
To further poke holes in her insanity defense, Amelia's ship's carpenter brother, James Hobley, who had not seen his sister in over 30 years because of her estrangement from the family, testified to the lack of a family history of insanity and made it clear that she was no sister of his. He even asked to remain anonymous to conceal his connection to her. Although Jane also testified, most damning for Amelia was her daughter, Polly's, lengthy, allegedly exaggerated testimony, which drove her to tears. Amelia Dyer's baby farming business flew in the face of the belief that a woman's place was in the home and that her role was to be a moral caretaker. Add on the shock and horror that her victims were children, and after a 3-day trial, it took only 4.5 minutes of deliberation for the all male jury to dismiss her plea of insanity. She was then sentenced to death for the murder of Doris Marmon and sent to Newgate Prison. After having been found guilty, Amelia pulled off the mask and revealed the cold hearted killer beneath, one who saw her young victims as disposable playthings, saying, "I used to like to watch them with the tape around their neck, but it was soon all over with them. Though when I'd thrown them in the water, I felt better and easier like in my mind."
Lovely.
As much as she was doing it for the money, I don't think anyone can doubt the enjoyment she took from killing after hearing that quote.
Amelia was soon dealt with just as dispassionately. Her executioner, James Billington, who went on to become the chief executioner of Great Britain and Ireland, wow, maybe that's something to aspire to. Goodness.
I'm sure.
Had traveled to Newgate to execute 3 male prisoners as well as Amelia. The bodies of the 3 men were already buried beneath the flagstones by the time that Amelia was led to the noose. At a little before 9 on June 10th, 1896, 58-year-old Amelia Dyer was led to the scaffold beneath the beam to which James, who had weighed her to see how far she would need to drop for her neck to break and instant death to occur, was waiting. Amelia expressed her gratitude for the kindness of the female wardens. The 2 wardens who had been holding her up moved away, and James secured the noose and cap over her head before pulling the lever, causing Amelia to fall to her death. Upon seeing the hoisted black flag, the masses outside Newgate Prison went back home. And it will just never not amaze and disgust me that public hangings were an event for fellow citizens. Like, hurry up, Peggy and Martin. We need to head to the prison so we don't miss the hanging.
We gotta hurry so we can get a good spot. Heaven forbid we miss the light leaving their eyes.
So twisted.
We've always been fascinated by death. Whereas Amelia was buried beside the other convicted murderers at Newgate, Doris Marmon, Harry Simmons, and two unidentified babies had been brought from the mortuary to an unconsecrated section of Reading Old Cemetery nearly 2 months before her execution. After the cemetery superintendent, A. Gibbs, officiated their funeral at 1 in the afternoon on April 14th, 1896, they were buried in a common grave with several other infants and adults. Despite the crowd who had managed to find out about the proceeding, the funeral was not publicized and the plot number does not appear on the cemetery map, which could have been due to a record keeping error or the stigma surrounding illegitimate children.
Fucking judgmental hypocrites. It's not the children's fault, or, of course, the mothers.
Yeah, I couldn't find a definitive answer to this, but it looks like the shame surrounding sex out of wedlock meant that pauper funerals, which involved unmarked common graves due to the cost of a private grave, weren't uncommon in these circumstances. So, to maximize the misery, this doesn't seem to be a one off.
I'm sure.
That said, Reading residents did create a memorial for the murdered babies by carving wooden crosses into the railing on the Clapper's footbridge.
I mean, that's something.
But Amelia's notoriety was no less well remembered. Ballads were even written about the woman who became known as the Ogress of Reading, including one whose chorus goes, "That old baby farmer, the wretch Mrs. Dyer, at the Old Bailey her wages is paid. In times long ago, we'd have made a big fire and roasted so nicely that wicked old jade."
That's great. I mean, were school children singing that while playing?
Maybe while their father sang it down at the pub?
I mean, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, I wouldn't set my time travel machine to this period.
Definitely not.
The Dyer family legacy lived on when 2 years after Amelia's execution, Polly was arrested for leaving a baby wrapped in brown paper in a railway carriage at Newton Station, and Arthur was arrested for aiding and abetting the crime. Luckily, a railway porter found the child alive. And I would argue that the way they discarded this child showed that Polly and Arthur had been actively involved in Amelia's business. I would go so far as to say that the sick looking Harold was likely one of the children they mistreated or even helped murder.
I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I definitely think they were actively involved in the family business. I mean, poor little Harold, he didn't stand a chance.
Few of them did.
On a larger scale, Amelia's trial prompted a widespread discussion about the brutality of baby farming and the common crime of child murder. When considering the murder cases that were presented to coroner courts, the victims in more than 60% were infants who were less than a year old, and everyone was well aware that only a handful of infant murder cases even made it that far. Amelia's conviction ushered in progress in the form of the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897. 25 years after it was first introduced, it now stipulated that the local authorities had to be notified within 48 hours of a child being taken in or of a foster child dying. Yet, although the age limit was raised from 1 year to 5 years, those with only one child still didn't have to notify the local authorities at all. And while these authorities had the power to appoint inspectors, they didn't have to, which left foster parents free to ignore the new regulations. Finally, though the 1908 Children Act addressed many of the larger loopholes, this act required foster parents who took in any child under the age of 7 for a fee to notify the local authorities about the arrangement within 48 hours. They also had to inform the coroner if their foster child died within 24 hours. This time around, inspectors had to be appointed to conduct infant life protection visits, and these visits could result in the removal of the child from the home. Foster parents were also prohibited from taking out life insurance on their children. Yeah, life insurance on any child should be a giant, nefarious red flag.
I can't believe we still have that here. I mean, I can understand some of the reasons for it, but surely it's a massive motive for murder.
It does seem like an open invitation.
Yeah.
Yet the legislation passed in the wake of Amelia's execution failed to address the circumstances that led unmarried mothers to seek out baby farmers. As the Women's Penny paper pointed out in the article The Baby Farming Murders, which came out the day after Amelia was hanged, unless fathers also had an obligation to their children, disgraced and poverty stricken mothers would still find themselves turning to baby farmers. I mean, imagine holding the sperm donor responsible. What a concept.
It's almost like we're acknowledging that they played a role in the conception too.
You know, it's always the woman's fault.
Men just can't help themselves. Over 120 years after Amelia's abhorrent actions came to light, in March 2017, Detective Constable Anderson's great great grandson, Richard Anderson, stumbled upon a box in his Reading loft that contained some of the evidence that had led to Amelia's conviction. Inside the box was an evidence tag, along with the white edging tape, string, and brown paper used to commit and cover up her crimes. Because detectives at the time were the ones to take the evidence to court, it was then stored by Detective Constable Anderson after the trial. The recovered items are now displayed at the Thames Valley Police Museum in Sulhamstead, Berkshire, in the exhibit on the infamous baby farmer Amelia Dyer. I have to say that I think that she feigned madness to prolong her murderous career and avoid poverty. Her time working as a nurse at the Bristol Lunatic Asylum had given her the knowledge she needed to fake the right symptoms and a believable recovery in order to be admitted for long enough to evade arrest before getting out and getting right back to it. That said, that doesn't necessarily mean that she was a well woman. With so many people addicted to laudanum that the condition was referred to as morphinomania for Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, I would hazard a guess that more than a few Victorians struggled with their mental health. Of course, that doesn't in any way excuse her killing dozens, perhaps hundreds of children, but I do think it was easier to see her and other baby farmers as the only problem when, as cruel and culpable as some of them were, they were a byproduct of society that left many with no good options.
Well said. A society steeped in unimaginable poverty with unchecked sexism and zero societal safety nets, it's only going to lead people to do unimaginable things to survive. I do think she was beyond evil, though.
Oh, definitely. That's not up for debate. Because Halloween is next week, we'll be honoring the occasion by taking a break from female killer nurses when we discuss the cases of Timothy O'Brien and Lisa Ann French, both of which happened on All Hallows Eve.
All the sources we use for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, you can email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifyingly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.